Hey friends, today we're going to learn all about Copilot Studio to build your own agents. We'll look at how to create a conversational agent and explore how we can connect that to your data, have it perform actions, how publishing works, and so much more. So let's dive in and get started. Copilot Studio is part of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, so you'll need a Microsoft 365 work or school account to access it. Just go to copilotstudio.microsoft.com and that will take you right to the landing page, and everything we do will be built right here in the browser. We have a few things here on the home page. At the top, we have this text box where we can use a chat-based experience to create our agents. Below, we'll have a list of the recent agents that you created. At the bottom, we'll have a bunch of resources to get started and learn more about things like security and governance and everything you want to know about building an agent. And in this middle section, we have some pre-built agents for common scenarios to help you get started quickly. Let's start by taking a look at one of these first, and then we'll build our own custom agent. A really common use case for agents is to have a website Q&A. So let's take a look at this website Q&A template and see what's going on behind the scenes. When we use one of these templates, it's going to come pre-configured with a few things. It'll have a name and a description, but also some instructions. And you'll find as you start building agents that the instructions are really key to how your agent performs and what it does. Because the instructions are your opportunity as the creator to direct the behavior of your agent and tell it what to do. So for a website Q&A example, it has some preloaded instructions here to maintain a polite and professional tone while assisting with questions about the knowledge source. There are no specific topics that are off limits for discussion. There's a few key things about the instructions that you'll see here. One, it's very specific about the task. You're answering questions about a knowledge source in this case. Second, it's giving your agent a personality or a way to act. In this case, it's maintain a professional and polite tone. But it doesn't always have to be something like be polite and professional. You can get more creative, have it talk like Shakespeare, have it talk like a pirate, whatever your heart desires. And another important thing with your instructions is to give it some boundaries. So with the case of this template, we're kind of saying that there's not really any boundaries at all because nothing is off topic, but there might be some cases where you want to make sure that they're not talking about competitors' products or things like that, and you can specify that in your instructions. And the next big important piece is at the very bottom, and that's your knowledge. And this is where we equip our agent with where we want it to get its information from. So you'll see this template comes preloaded with the Microsoft website. I can click on these three dots and go to open and see where that's pointing to. So this will actually take this entire website and all of its subpages and be able to get information from that. And we can add as many knowledge sources as we'd like here. These knowledge sources can be public websites like that Microsoft website, but it can also be internal knowledge sources. We'll look at these other knowledge sources a little bit later on. For now, let's finish configuring this template. So we're going to click this Create tab, and that will set up the template for us so we can start testing it out. A benefit of using these templates is it gives you a solid foundation that you can then customize to meet your specific needs. But just by using this template, I now have a working agent to answer questions about the Microsoft website. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see we have this test pane. And if you ever don't see that, you can click on this test button in the upper right-hand corner, and that toggles that panel on and off. This is where we can thoroughly test out our agents before we publish them to make sure that they're working correctly. Now with your agents, you just have a chat-based conversation with it, and it goes and pulls information, in this case from our knowledge source, dynamically. So we'll test this out. I'll ask it, what is Copilot Studio? That's something that should be on the Microsoft website, and we'll see what it returns. And it's going to reply with an answer that Copilot Studio is a graphical low-code tool designed for creating agents and building automations. And then you'll notice we have these little clickable links, which are sources that are cited, that show us exactly where on that Microsoft site that it got that information so we can read more. So in this case of a website Q&A, we would probably embed this on our website. Now to do that, we can go to Publish. And after you publish your changes, you can go over to the Channels tab. And this will show you everywhere that you can actually deploy your agent. The channels that you can deploy your agent to depend on what authentication that you have set up for your agent. So you might find if I click on the custom website that I can't actually deploy there yet because my authentication settings are defaulted to Teams authentication. So let me show you where you can configure your authentication to be able to publish this to your public website. In the top right-hand corner, you have a settings option. And in settings on the left-hand side, you have a security tab. We'll select authentication, And you'll notice the default is to authenticate with Microsoft, and this is optimized for if you want to publish your agent to Microsoft Teams, Power Apps, or Microsoft 365 Copilot. But we have other options like no authentication or authenticate manually. And the manual authentication would be if you're using a service provider like Azure Active Directory or OAuth. And no authentication is kind of how it implies. No authentication is needed, which is what we would want probably if we're using this just embedded on our public website. So I can switch that and toggle that to no authentication and save. And we can close out of the settings screen by clicking the X right here in the upper right hand corner. And now if we go back in the Channels tab and select Custom Website, we'll see that's an option. And what we get is actually embed code. So it's just as simple as copying this embed code and pasting that in our website to use. So I don't have a website spun up to show you this entire process of embedding it, but I'll show you a cool trick if you just want to test it out and see what it would look like on a website. One of the other channels that we have is this demo website option. And this will actually kind of mimic the look and feel of what this will look like on a website. So we can do some additional customization here, like putting in a welcome message and even putting in some conversation starters. So once I have that in, I can click save. And we can just copy this link that it has to this demo website. And I can share this with any of my colleagues. So we'll open up that URL and we can do some more testing. So we can ask it another question here, like what service device would you recommend for a developer? And there we go. Same thing, just seeing how this would look in the context of being embedded on a website. Now, of course, this isn't all we can do with Copilot Studio. Next, let's take a look at how we can build a custom agent from scratch. We'll go over to this Create tab in the left navigation and we'll select New Agent. By default, it's going to take you to this experience where you build out your agent using a conversation. If you don't want to do this, you want to do things more manually, you can always choose Skip to Configure. But let's go ahead and walk through how we can do this with the conversational approach. So the first thing it's asking us is, what would you like to make? So I'm going to tell it I would like to create an agent to help with our employee onboarding process. And you'll notice as I reply to these questions, on the right-hand side, it's filling out the individual steps and instructions for the agent. And based off of what I said I want this agent to do, it's going to suggest a name for the agent, which is Onboarding Assistant. And it's just asking me to either confirm that or suggest something else. So I'll just reply with, that works. Now it's asking us to help refine the instructions for the agent. So it wants us to provide a little bit more details about what it should do. So I'm just going to put in something like this, that this agent will allow new employees to ask questions and get answers about common onboarding topics like benefits, training, company info, and more, and will assist them in scheduling trainings. So we'll send that in, and it will come back with some more questions here. Now at this stage, it's going to ask us if there are any public websites that we want to use as knowledge sources. This step is optional, so often I will skip this and I'll manually configure all of those knowledge sources once this creates the agent for us. So I'll just say none. So if we're in a good spot, we can just click create here, and that will go in, set up our agent, and we can finish configuring this and adding more functionality. Based off of our conversation, we have the name getting carried over, the description for what this does, and those general custom instructions. For our onboarding process, we have a lot of the information we need on this SharePoint site. Some of the information is embedded in Pages, and other pieces of information are stored in this document library. So I want to use this as a knowledge source. And on the home page here of our agent, we'll scroll down to the knowledge section and choose Add Knowledge. And for this, we're going to select SharePoint as our option here, and we can just put in that URL and select Add. So now we'll add this in, and this will go and index that SharePoint site so that I can crawl and get information from that and use it as a knowledge source. So with this knowledge, we're able to mix and match SharePoint data with public website data as well. So maybe I want to also reference the Microsoft site again as a public website. So I'll choose that option and I'll put in Microsoft.com because this can be beneficial for new hires if they want to get more information about some of the Microsoft technology that we use. So I'll add that in. And if we go to Add Knowledge again, there's even more knowledge sources that we have available to us. So we obviously have public websites with SharePoint, but we can also reference Dataverse data. So this will show you all of the different Dataverse tables that you have in your environment that you can choose from and select those as knowledge sources. If we go to Advanced, we have some more options here like Azure SQL, Salesforce, and all of that. And if we go back to the featured section, we can also manually upload files. So we could drag and drop or click to browse. And we can select a file, say maybe like this Word document, and there is some limitations on the file size. They can be up to 512 megabytes, and you'll also need to pay attention to your sensitivity labels. If you have those marked as confidential or highly confidential, you won't be able to reference those by this upload capability. So this is really good for static data that you might want to reference, like this employee training doc that has for each department what required training there are and what day of the week those run. So I want to be able to reference that in my case, so I'll just upload that and we'll select add, and that will take a little bit for it to index this file, and we'll be able to use that in our agent. And some of these knowledge sources do take some time to index, so you can check the status by clicking on the Knowledge tab. And you'll see all of your different knowledge sources and a status here, so I can see that the public website and our SharePoint site is ready, but it's still indexing that Word document that I uploaded. So I just did a refresh and I can see the status is ready on that, so all of this knowledge is ready to use. Now, one tip I have for you all when working with agents in Copilot Studio is to test early and often. So each time you make a major change, test and make sure it's still working. So in this case, before I go adding a bunch of additional functionality, let me first test to make sure that these knowledge sources are returning data. We'll start with that Word file. I'm going to ask it what training is required for IT, which should come from that document. And there you go. That seems to be working correctly. So it's pulling all of that from the file, and there is the reference to that doc. And if I click on this, I want to show you one more thing about what's happening behind the scenes. So there's essentially two different modes that we can have our agents run in. There's classic orchestration and there's generative orchestration. The default is this classic model, and how it works is what you're seeing here. Everything goes through something called topics, which are a way that you define the conversation flow. You have something that triggers it, which would be a phrase in this case, and then you have different nodes or things that can happen. So when we're using knowledge like this, there's a generative answers node that's basically just going and making a call to all of the data sources, and it's trying to find a data source that has the answer to the question. And if it finds it, it's returning it. I'll talk about the generative side of this later on and how you can enable that and how it's a little bit different. For now, let's keep testing our agent just to make sure it's pulling information from those other data sources. In the SharePoint site, we have benefits information. So I'm going to say, what are our employee benefits? And see if I can get it to pull information from our SharePoint document library knowledge source. And all right, it looks like it's doing that too. It pulled up this PDF of all of our benefit information. So far, so good. Now I'm going to ask it a technology question. Maybe internally I want to build a Power App. So I'm going to ask, what permissions do I need to build a Power App? This should come from that Microsoft public website. All right, and there you go. So I just did thorough testing, pointing me to the Microsoft website with some information about role-based security and a Power App and all that, so I can be assured that all of those knowledge sources are working properly. Now, this is a great example of a custom agent that's using your business data, website data, and even data that you've uploaded. But we can make this do even more. So let's go back to the overview page. And we just talked about the orchestration and how default is the classic orchestration that we just saw, where it has that topic where it's calling generative answers. But on the home page, we can toggle this generative orchestration to on. And this will allow AI to dynamically determine what data sources to use. And this is really important when you start wanting to do things in your agent, like adding actions. Now, before we talk about actions, we just made a change and turned on generative orchestration. So let's make sure to do a test to ensure that our knowledge is still working. I'll ask another question like, do we have a 401k? And you'll notice something different here. It's not going straight to that topic. It's showing this activity map. This is what happens when you do have that generative orchestration turned on. It's going to show you a live kind of mind map look at what your agent is doing. So it's reasoning over your knowledge sources. It's going to show us where it ended up pulling that information from, and we'll give you a link to that. Now that we got that out of the way and ensured that generative orchestration is working, let's look at actions. These are how we add more power to our agents by letting them do things for us. If we scroll down on this homepage, we can add an action. And what's going on behind the scenes is it's letting us leverage the Power Platform connector ecosystem. So we have over 1,300 connectors to different services within the Power Platform, and each of those can perform different actions, which are accessible to us via our agent. We'll see a select few of those Power Platform connectors here in this featured section, but we can also use the search to search for any other connectors. And we're not limited to just using Power Platform connectors. If we click on this new action button, we can also integrate with AI Builder prompts. We can directly call Power Automate Cloud Flows as well that can perform a multitude of different steps and actions and return data back to our agent. We can call custom connectors to access external data sources and natively connect to REST APIs as well to call external data sources, and even upload our own skills with Azure Bot Framework. So we have all of these options available to us. Let's actually search for one of those Power Platform connectors. There's a connector called the Office 365 Users Connector that I think would be helpful to have with our agent. One of the actions in this is to get my user profile, which allows us to get more information about the user. This might be helpful for new employees, so I'm going to select that. In this step, we're going to make a connection to that connector by passing in our credentials. So we'll have that and click Next. And then we can fill out some additional information. When you are using actions and you have generative orchestration turned on, it's very important that you have a detailed description because this is what tells your agent when it should call this action. So I think what we have here is actually good. So retrieves the profile of the current user, pretty descriptive, so we can leave that. The other thing to look for is your authentication. The default will always be user authentication, meaning it will pass in the credentials of the user asking the question. But if you ever need it, you can change this to Copilot Author Authentication to instead use the credentials of the person that created the agent. We'll leave that as a default and we'll click Add an Action. So now that we have that added, let's do a test. So one of the things that we should be able to do with that action is get information about the user, like what's their department. So I can say, what is my department? And it's going to take me back to that activity map. And now you see it kind of skipped past the knowledge sources and went straight to the Get My Profile. Now you might get this message in here that additional permissions are needed. So when you initially run this, you might have to do the connection just to confirm your connector into that Office 365 service. So we'll connect here and pick a connection. And once we have kind of the green connected, there we go, we can go back to our agent and retry. So it automatically knew how to call that Get My Profile, and it knew to run in the context of me, the person asking the question. So it came back with an answer that I'm in the consulting department. So that was a good example of how we can call these actions to return information. But now let's see how we can use these same actions to write data to a system. So we're going to go back to the Add Action button, and this time I'm going to search for SharePoint Create Item. So here's the action that we want. So I'll select that. We'll do some setup, doing the connection reference and all of that. Click Next. And what we want to do here is if we go back to our onboarding site, we actually have an onboarding issue tracker. So if a new employee runs into any issue, like maybe they can't get logged into a certain system, we want them to be able to interact with our agent and be able to add in an issue here to alert IT. So I want to update this description so it gives a little bit more detail about what this action is intending to do. So I'll just say that this logs an issue to the onboarding SharePoint issues list. We'll keep the same authentication and we'll add the action and go back and configure the inputs. So here's our create an item action and we'll click on the inputs tab. Depending on the action that you choose, you'll have different inputs and outputs. By default, it's going to show only the required inputs here. If you have any additional inputs, say other fields in that list that we want to be able to fill out, we can always click Add and add those in. And when we're working with inputs, we have two ways that we can configure them. One is to manually set the value, and the other is to dynamically fill using instructions. The site address, we'll need to manually set that as a value, so we'll choose from a list of options here and select our onboarding site. But for the list name, we can also set that as a value and hard code that. And we'll select our onboarding issue tracker. Now we can go click Add and we can select whatever additional inputs that we want to fill in. So we need to fill out the issue, which should map to the title field, so we'll select that. And for this, we're going to choose the dynamically fill option. And for the description, we'll say fill with a less than 255 character summary of the issue that the user logged in the chat. This is the type of information it needs to know how to dynamically fill these properties. And we're just going to keep repeating this process for every input that we want to fill in. There's a description field as well. So this is what we want to fill in dynamically, except for this time we're going to say fill with a full detail summary of the issue the user describes. And that should be all that's required. So we're going to save all of these options and we'll test it out. So I'm going to put in a message here that I have an issue. I can't log on to the SharePoint site and I need access to this. What can I do? How can I log this issue? So we'll look at the activity map. It went right to that create an item action, recognizing that I need to log an issue. Now we're getting that permission thing again, so we'll just need to do that initial connection. So we'll connect to that SharePoint connector and submit that. There you go. We'll close out of that and we'll do a retry. And it says the issue has been logged successfully, and we can track our issue here. It even gives you a link right to the SharePoint site of where it added the issue. So here's that summary of the issue, access denied to company portal, and here is the full description taken directly from our chat. That right there is the power of actions in your agent. So now what do we do if we want to deploy our agent so others can use it? This is an internal use case for an onboarding process, so it would be good if we could push this out in Teams for our new employees to access. And if that's the case, in our security option, we can leave it as the default option here, which is Teams authentication. So in the security tab, we can go over to authentication and see that the authenticate with Microsoft is the default option, which would work for our case. So once we confirm that, we can close out and we can publish everything. So we made a lot of changes. So the first step into getting this out is to first publish all of the changes that you made. And then we're going to jump over to the channels tab and we can see all the places that we can deploy this to. We want to deploy this to Teams, so we're going to select this Teams plus Microsoft 365 channel option. We'll select Add Channel, and now the channel was added so we can see this agent inside of Microsoft Teams. We'll get this screen and we'll need to add this into Teams. This will add it as a personal app, but we can always deploy this out via the Teams App Store for all of our users. And I'll link to a video in the description which shows you exactly how to do that. So now we're going to open up our agent and we can interact with it just like we were in the test pane. So I could ask, what is my job title? See if it can pull from that Office 365 users action that we added. And then it goes and returns my job title there as SharePoint developer, which is right. And I can keep interacting with this, asking questions about my knowledge sources and working with that additional action to log issues and all of that. So that's all I want to cover in this video. I wanted to give you a high-level introduction, show you how to build your agent in Copilot Studio, connect it with your internal and external knowledge, and add actions to retrieve and add information to your different services. I'll do some follow-up videos where I'll show more advanced topics of how you can configure and customize your agents in the future. So if you're interested in that, drop a note in the comments and let me know. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please click that subscribe button to be alerted for more videos, and I'll see you in the next video.